Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a channel called Whaddo You Meme. I think he's going for Whaddo You Meme, but in order to get that he would have at least had to end the first word with an A. This channel seems to exist for the sole purpose of taking memes on the internet way too seriously, so let's see what meme he's got for us today.
Now, I do want to write a letter to the creator of this meme, but before I do, I have to explain why I'm giving him this letter. And the letter I'm going to give him is the letter L. And I don't think he's going to have a choice but to take it, because I'm about to show why he has to take this L.
And the letter I'm giving you is D. Let me show you why you have to take the D.
Now, I know that the title of this video probably sounds like clickbait, but bear with me. Don't jump to conclusions just yet. Wait until the very end, or you're probably going to misunderstand why I decided to title the video this.
Okay, well, my understanding of what makes something clickbait is that the title over-exaggerates how interesting the content will be. So an article titled 10 Best Time-Saving Life Hacks, Number 4 Will Blow Your Mind would be clickbait if the life hacks they list are not actually the best, and there's nothing particularly special about number 4. So to apply that here, in order to not be clickbait, you need to be talking about an actual occurrence of radical atheists eating people, and explain how that's the norm for radical atheism. I'm not above using the occasional clickbaity title myself, but don't try and pretend that's not what you're doing.
Today's meme is brought to us by the famous Friendly Atheist.
Yeah, I like how you said that, as if you can't even comprehend the idea of someone being both an atheist and friendly. Well, from what I've seen of Hemant Mehta, he does seem friendly. But yeah, I'll just chalk that one up to pandering to your target audience.
It says, radical Muslims fly planes into buildings. Radical Christians kill abortion doctors. But radical atheists write books.
Now, before we go any further, I'm just going to point out that I do not agree with this quote 100%. There is definitely some truth to it, but as is the case with most pithy quotes, there is quite a bit more nuance to it than that.
Yeah, so let's get into it. All right, let's start with the word radical. So radical means relating to or affecting the fundamental nature of something, far-reaching or thorough. So this meme seems to be making the point that if we follow the most core or fundamental teachings or beliefs of our worldviews to their extremes, this should lead Muslims to fly planes into buildings, Christians to kill abortion doctors, or atheists to write books.
Yeah, that's essentially what he's saying. Stick to the fundamentals of Islam, and it's not hard to find justification for killing non-Muslims for one reason or another. Stick to the fundamentals of Christianity, and you can definitely find justification for violence. Not specifically against abortion doctors, but it's not like Jesus claimed to bring peace or anything. Stick to the fundamentals of atheism, and you come to the conclusion that the life we have is precious because it's the only one we get, so treat it with respect. Again, not specifically about writing books, but I think Hemant was commenting on actual behaviors of the fundamentalists in these groups, rather than specifically what the fundamentals are. Extreme radical atheists tend to be peaceful people who just want to advance education and scientific literacy, and an excellent way of accomplishing that is to write books. Now I'm going to skip ahead a bit because all he does for now is explain why Islam, if you take its fundamentals, can be said to condone violence. And I largely agree, though I do understand that arguments can be made to explain away the violent verses in favor of the peaceful ones.
Now, what about Christianity? Do the foundational beliefs or teachings of Christianity lead Christians to be violent?
As I am more familiar with Christianity than with Islam, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that it completely depends on which verses you're reading and which ones you consider to be more important or valuable.
Christianity was founded by the person named Jesus Christ in the 1st century. Christians believe that Jesus was perfect and also a person that we should ascribe to be more like.
Yes, the Bible does say to be like Jesus. So when the Christian high school I went to brought in a professional worship band for chapel one day, and they had CDs for sale at the back of the chapel, the appropriate Christ-like response would have been to overturn the table, scatter their money, and chase them out with a whip. Gotcha, that's definitely non-violent.
He's the perfect example of how Christians should live. So, what about Jesus and violence? If you've ever read the New Testament, towards the end of Jesus' life, 2 authorities came to arrest Jesus, and Peter pulls out his sword to attack them. And what does Jesus say?
His sword that he specifically told him to bring, after saying to sell his cloak to buy one. So sell your clothes so that you can have enough money to buy weapons. Super peaceful.
Peter, put your sword away. Now, take mine. It's much bigger, much sharper, and perfect for killing the Sanhedrin. No, I'm just kidding. He doesn't say that, obviously. Instead, he said, put your sword away, because those who live by the sword die by the sword.
Yeah, you're right. He is sending mixed messages. If only the omnipotent creator of the universe could have figured out a way to be more clear.
All through Jesus' ministry, he told his followers to pray for those who persecute him and to love their enemies.
He also specifically said that he did not come to bring peace but a sword, and to turn families against themselves. He also told a parable which can easily be turned into an excuse to kill non-believers, the parable of the 10 minas. Similar to the talents parable, but with the nobleman traveling to inherit a kingdom, kind of like how Jesus was supposed to go and inherit the kingdom of heaven before returning. And then after being told by the servant who did not invest the mina that he reaps what he does not sow, the nobleman orders that everyone who doesn't want him to reign over them should be brought before him and slaughtered. A simple, clear reading of this parable suggests that it is the believer's job to kill non-believers. Now, I would agree that other interpretations are definitely possible, but again, you'd think an omnipotent being could be a little bit more clear if he actually wanted us to be peaceful.
He modeled this behavior when he was arrested, and as he was being beaten to death, he still prayed for his enemies and for the Father to forgive them as he was being killed.
Well, I mean, that depends on which version of the story you're reading. Jesus doesn't pray for any of his persecutors in the book of John, but I know you probably subscribe to the whole same story from different perspectives thing to explain away any apparent contradictions in the Gospels, so you would probably just say that he did pray for them, John just didn't mention it. Except that John directly contradicts several other specific aspects of the story, almost like the author didn't want his version to be associated with the other versions, like that bit about making it explicitly known that he carried his own damn cross. Nobody helped him with it. But I digress. You can look at my Easter series for a little bit more in-depth on that.
In fact, there are no teachings of Jesus encouraging people to be violent.
Does that mean that we're not supposed to emulate Jesus? Because if we are, he definitely felt that violence was justifiable in at least some situations, such as selling things in his father's house. Or are we supposed to selectively emulate him and just emulate the parts that are nice? I didn't even get into the part where he specifically said that not one iota or dot shall pass from the law until heaven and earth pass away, and all the laws of the Old Testament which require violence to properly enforce, because that one's there too, and that opens up a whole other can of violent worms.
Now, I know that some Muslims like to point to Luke 19:27, where they say that Jesus is commanding his followers to go get his enemies and to kill them in front of him.
I remember this one. I already mentioned it. This is the one that is a parable that could go either way, depending on your interpretation, where the omnipotent God could probably have just left a note at the end saying, "Hey guys, this isn't meant to encourage violence. Please be peaceful and respectful of your fellow human beings." But he didn't end it that way. He ended it with a command to slaughter his enemies.
But what they don't tell you is that this verse is actually from a parable. It's from a story that Jesus was telling.
A story whose apparent message is for believers to be good stewards of what God has given them and to kill non-believers.
He wasn't actually commanding his followers to go kill people. Now, what about atheism? Do the fundamental beliefs and teachings of atheism lead atheists to write books? Now, some atheists who are notorious for claiming that they don't have a burden of proof to show that God does not exist claim that atheism just means a lack of belief in God. And if we accept that definition, that means that babies and brain-dead people and doorknobs are all atheists.
Yeah, not quite. The lack of belief starts with the assumption that the atheist is a thinking being which has the ability to form beliefs of one kind or another. So the baby is debatable, but a brain-dead person and a doorknob do not have belief-forming capabilities, and as such should neither be referred to as atheist or theist.
If this is the definition of atheism that atheists want to use, then obviously atheism has no foundation or core beliefs or teachings because doorknobs and brain-dead people can't think but are still atheists.
You're close. There are no core beliefs outside of the lack of belief in a god or gods. Once you get past that one point, then there are atheists from all over the place. There are liberal atheists, conservative atheists, mystical atheists, rational atheists, smart atheists, stupid atheists, woo-peddling atheists, atheists who don't even care about religion and so don't even think about it, and basically atheists from any other category you can come up with.
Atheism, not good for your mind because no thinking is required.
I would agree that you don't really need to put much thought into being an atheist, but the same could be said of theism. And neither of these statements says anything about whether or not the adherents to atheism or theism actually do any thinking about it. Like I said, stupid atheists do exist. And guess what? Stupid theists exist too. Same with smart ones. Sweeping generalizations like this don't really help anyone.
So in this definition, writing books couldn't possibly be a consequence of the core and fundamental beliefs and teachings of atheism because there aren't any.
And again, I would like to point out that Hammett was not looking at specific teachings, he was looking at behaviors that are informed by people's worldviews. The 9/11 attackers would not have flown their planes into the World Trade Center if they did not believe in Islam, even though there's nothing in the Quran that says to fly planes into buildings, mainly because they didn't know about planes when it was written. The people who bomb abortion clinics and shoot abortion doctors wouldn't do those things if not for their Christian faith, even though there's nothing in the Bible saying specifically to bomb abortion doctors or clinics or anything like that. And extreme atheists like himself, Dawkins, Sam Harris, etc. wouldn't be writing books if they were not atheists trying to educate the world on the potential harms of religion. I will even point out now that, in my opinion, if you follow the fundamentals laid out in the Bible, you should not be anti-abortion. God himself performed abortions in the Old Testament, and many of the Old Testament stories involving children seem to treat the children as property rather than as individuals with value. For instance, in the book of Job, Satan is allowed to kill Job's entire family, wife and children, and in the end, to make it up to Job, God gives him a new wife and new kids as if they don't have individual value, but have value as property, like how if my TV breaks, I can just go out and replace it. That's how kids are. So going to the fundamentals of the Bible, my kids aren't important because I can always have more if something happens. And this is after they're born, so if they're so unimportant when they are clearly not 100% reliant on their mother, then why would their lives matter when they are still in utero?
However, if the atheist doesn't avoid the burden of proof like the Black Plague, and takes the classical definition of atheism, then the logic still doesn't follow, unfortunately. The classical definition of atheism refers to someone who believes that the statement, God does not exist, is a true statement.
Yeah, even if you swap it around like that, I still don't think the burden of proof is on the atheist. I mean, you can do the same thing with any mythical creature that nobody believes in. An a-leprechaunist is not someone who lacks a belief in leprechauns, it's someone who believes the statement that leprechauns do not exist. So now the burden of proof is on the a-leprechaunist to demonstrate that they do not exist. Do you believe in the small black teapot orbiting Mars? No? You're an a-teapotist? So you believe that the statement there is no small black teapot orbiting Mars is true, right? Okay, so the burden of proof is on you. Do you see how ridiculous that is?
Now, I can't see how writing books has anything to do with believing that God does not exist, especially given the obvious fact that people who believe God exists still can write books.
Again, I would like to point out that he wasn't discussing specific doctrine, he was discussing behaviors. Yes, Christians can and do write books, but Christians also murder abortion doctors. The ones who do that tend to be the radical Christians. Atheists, on the other hand, only extremely rarely commit violence specifically because of their atheism. The atheists that most people regard as the atheist extremists tend to be the atheist activist crowd, and one of the common activities among atheist activists is book writing. Find me an in-demand atheist activist speaker, and I will find you someone who probably has at least one book published.
Why imply that it's only Muslims who fly buildings into planes?
Your animation doesn't match your words. Here, I made you an accurate one.
And it's only Christians who kill abortion doctors when it's not only atheists who write books. That seems like a pretty obvious category mistake.
I don't think so. A category mistake is when things belong to a particular category, but they are presented as if they belong in a different category. So in the category people who fly planes into buildings, you can find radical Muslim terrorists. The radical Muslim terrorists definitely belong in this category, so no category mistake there. In the category of people who kill abortion doctors, you can find radical Christian terrorists. And in the category of people who write books, you can find what Hammett was referring to as radical atheists. This isn't to say that these are exclusive categories. There have been instances of pilots accidentally flying planes into buildings, so they also fit into that category. I'm sure at some point there was an abortion doctor killed for reasons not relating to their job, so the people who did those killings also fit within this category. Likewise, there are other people who write books. This does not mean that radical atheists don't belong in the book writing category, it just means that it isn't an exclusive category.
So the point of the meme can't be that the behaviors described in the meme are direct consequences of the foundational teachings of the worldview or the religious belief system.
Why not? I demonstrated earlier that the behaviors from the radical religious people can be traced directly back to their holy books. And when he was speaking of radical atheists, I'm pretty confident that he was basing that off the names that are usually brought up by religious apologists who often refer to people like Richard Dawkins as radical atheists or fundamentalist atheists as a pejorative.
I'm sure this meme can't be that bad. Let's go ahead and give him the benefit of a doubt and take a look at the meme in another way. This meme may be better worded as, if a Muslim takes his worldview to its extreme and is violent, he's acting consistent with Islam. If a Christian takes his worldview to his extreme and is violent, he's acting consistent with Christianity. If an atheist takes his worldview to an extreme and writes books, he's acting consistent with atheism.
I could agree with that, but again, I would like to point out that taking the worldview to the extreme is often a matter of interpretation. You may say that a Christian who kills abortion doctors is not being a good Christian, but the person doing it certainly thinks that they are doing the right thing in accordance with God's will, and can find scriptural justification for it. So while your interpretation of Christianity does not lead you to kill abortion doctors, it is undeniable that the people who have killed abortion doctors make those decisions based on their interpretation of Christianity.
Now kids, which one of these is not like the others?
The atheist, because there really isn't an atheist worldview, or even multiple interpretation possibilities with atheism. It is simply not believing in any theistic gods, and as such, taking the atheistic worldview to the extreme doesn't actually mean anything. Either I don't believe in gods, or I don't believe in gods
to the extreme.
There's really no difference, except that the people who are most vocal about their non-belief tend to be labeled as radical or extremist by the religious community.
Why the seemingly arbitrary category for atheism, right?
Because every time a religious person tells an atheist that they should keep their non-belief to themselves and just let people believe what they want, they are putting the vocal atheist in the category of radical or extreme. If you don't want us to own the label, then maybe don't label us with it in the first place, because we'll take that shit and run with it.
Let's ask the same question about atheism. If an atheist is violent, is he acting consistent with atheism?
It is neither consistent nor inconsistent, because the only action that is relevant to atheism is the action of belief in a deity. Violence is irrelevant to belief in a deity unless one believes that deity is commanding violence. There is nothing in atheism that commands violence, but there is also nothing in atheism that prohibits violence. Now, if you want to talk secular humanism, then we can ask whether its fundamentals encourage violence, and the answer to that question is a definite and resounding no.
If we don't want to say that atheism is just a lack of belief in God, committing ourselves to believing that you can literally be as dumb as a brick and still be an atheist, then we have to say that atheism means belief that God does not exist.
Sure, I'll submit to your word game and say that I have a positive belief that no God or gods exist. Still has nothing to do with violence one way or the other.
So what happens if we look at some super famous atheists who believe that God did not exist?
Oh goody, it's guilt by association time. Here comes Stalin, Mao, and or Pol Pot.
Let's take a look. First, we have Joseph Stalin, whose atheistic and communist regime killed over 20 million people.
He, personally, was an atheist. Was his atheism why he killed 20 million people? No, it was his lust for power and control. Same thing with outlawing of religion. The church was competing with the government for control of the people, so his actions were not being informed simply by his non-belief in God, but by his desire for control of the people. Next.
Next, we have Chairman Mao, whose atheist and communist regime killed over 65 million people.
I'm noticing a trend here. It seems that all of the atheists who kill lots of people also happen to be communist dictators, a position that you don't get to without the same desire for power and control that I mentioned when talking about Stalin. Same thing applies here. Next.
And let's not forget Pol Pot, whose atheist and communist regime killed over 2 million people.
Atheist and communist. The killing was informed by the communist worldview, not the atheist. The atheism was a tool to get rid of religion, which they saw as a competitor for control. If you want, I could bring up Hitler, who was a Christian. I don't think his Christianity is what led him to all the killing his regime did, though he certainly used religion as a tool within his regime. So if I wouldn't blame Hitler's actions on Christianity specifically, why do you get to blame communist dictators' actions on atheism?
Now, I know, some atheists are going to be saying, why did you mention some notorious killers who happen to be atheists instead of mentioning some famous atheists like some scientists or something like that, right?
No, because that would be asking you to bury facts in order to protect our feelings. I'd rather have an honest discussion about it, and in my opinion, even with the list of communist dictators who were also atheist, it does not appear that non-belief in God is responsible for the killings. Notice how the only time you can find atheists who commit atrocities like that, they are always tied to communism. Funny that.
Well, the reason why is because doing science is compatible with any worldview that I'm aware of.
Yeah, tell that to Ken Ham.
And in this video, we're looking at the killing of innocent people, which is inconsistent with some worldviews like Christianity and Jainism and so on.
I'm glad you brought up Jainism.
Ain't hard to explain. The hero of Canton, the man they call Jay.
Because if you take Jainism to the extreme, you get a vegan who watches very carefully where they step so they don't accidentally kill a bug. But as demonstrated, it's very easy to interpret the Bible in a way that has you killing people. Like, just take literally any of the verses that tell you to kill people. I know the vast majority of them are in the Old Testament, but if the Old Testament isn't to be used anymore, it shouldn't be in the Bible and called the Holy Word of God.
To play fair, we need to consider if murdering innocent people is consistent with atheism on the second definition, the belief that God does not exist.
I predict that this will devolve into him saying that morality comes from God, therefore if we don't believe in God, there is no morality, so we can kill whomever we want.
So, is violence consistent with that view? Let's think about it. So if God exists, there's some things that are good and there's some things that are wrong that transcend our personal taste or what society says.
Oh, I wish I was wrong. Here we go again.
If God does not exist, then killing innocent people for any reason that someone wishes can't really be wrong.
Why not? And why does God existing make killing an innocent person wrong? God himself ordered the killings of innocent people on numerous occasions. He also directly killed innocent people on numerous occasions, especially if you're anti-abortion and consider every fetus to be a valuable, independent, and innocent life, as God was essentially the abortion doctor in cases of unfaithfulness. So it is very clear to me that the existence of God is completely irrelevant to the morality of killing innocent people.
We just come to believe that some things are wrong because our societies have conditioned us to believe that, or because it helped our ancestors survive in the past according to evolution.
Close enough. And as the vast majority of us believe that these things are wrong, even if I grant you that it's tied to the non-belief in gods, that demonstrates that violence is inconsistent with the atheist worldview, as by your own admission, a preference for non-violence became the societal norm through evolution.
So when we think about societies, why couldn't it be that in these societies, it's okay to murder people in order to advance a communist regime?
Firstly, I would once again like to point out that they weren't murdering people to promote atheism, they were murdering people to suppress dissent. Second, I would be willing to bet that the majority of the people in that society did think it was wrong, but were too afraid to say so because, they didn't want to be murdered themselves.
If morals only come from what societies decide, and if these societies decided that it's okay to murder people in order to advance communism and atheism, then we would have to agree that it was okay for them to murder innocent people.
Not really. See my video on morality from the Veil of Ignorance for more detail on that.
If so, and if God doesn't exist, then we'd have to say that murdering people in order to advance a regime is consistent with atheism.
Nope. The question of morality is a separate question from whether or not atheism encourages violence. As atheism is simply not believing in gods, it doesn't actually inform an opinion one way or another. The title of your video suggests that you think there is some atheist doctrine which tells people to eat people, and that your title is not clickbait. So either make with the atheist people-eating doctrine, or accept the fact that you are using clickbait.
And in the case of evolution, we would be wired and programmed to feel that rape and murder are wrong, but that doesn't mean that they really are.
I fail to see a difference. Most of us have been conditioned by evolution to feel that these things are wrong. Does the fact that we're just feeling it mean that they aren't really wrong? Well, for humans, no. We all feel that these things are wrong and have put thought into it and have collectively decided that they are wrong. Therefore, they are wrong. Go back to the days in which the Old Testament books were written and check the morality. They didn't feel that killing was always wrong. It could be morally okay to kill in some situations, and rape was okay as long as the girl wasn't married and the rapist paid off the girl's dad. Today, we see this and say it is morally wrong because we're looking at it through our society's view of what is right and wrong. But yeah, it's impossible to have morality without God. Specifically, the God who wrote into law that a rape victim must marry the rapist, or that people who work on the wrong day of the week should be executed. That's objective morality for you.
We would only feel that way because it helped our ancestors survive. Think about it this way. The atheist might argue that the only reason that I feel like God exists is because this belief helped our ancestors survive, but God doesn't really exist in reality, right?
That is one hypothesis, yeah. It is a fact that our brains are agency-detecting machines, meaning that they are hardwired to ascribe meaning and purpose to everything. It's the analogy of seeing grass move from the corner of your eye. If you think it's a tiger moving and it was just the wind, you survive. If you think it's a tiger and it's actually a tiger, you might survive. If you think it's the wind and it's a tiger, you're dead for sure. Natural selection over time exaggerates this feature to where we detect agency where there is none at all, and as such, when ancient humans saw things like the wind blowing or lightning striking, they assigned agency to them. There must be some being that is making the lightning and the wind. This gradually morphed into religion. It's not known for sure if this is what happened, but it is a likely scenario.
And by that same logic, our morality evolved to make us feel like certain things are wrong, but these things aren't really wrong in reality.
Nice try, but not quite. You see, the way we treat other human beings have real-world consequences. If there is no God and you claim that there is, the only real-world consequences from that stem directly from how you behave toward other people as a result of that belief. If I feel like killing people is bad and everyone else agrees with me, and we then decide that killing is wrong, it doesn't matter where that feeling originated, it is real, and we have agreed that killing really is wrong. Whether the universe at large agrees with us is irrelevant. We are only talking about us. If you feel that there is a God and there isn't, your feeling is still real, but the only real-world consequences stem from how you behave as a result of this feeling. And oftentimes, the real-world consequences of belief in a God are innocent deaths.
Now, if you compare these two arguments, I'm pretty much just saying to him, on your worldview, feeling like certain things are wrong is just a consequence of evolution. These things aren't really wrong in reality.
All you're basically saying here is that atheists don't believe in objective morality. Which isn't always true, but if I play devil's advocate here and say that morality is not objective, that doesn't mean that morality isn't real, it just means that it's subjective. I fail to see the problem or how that encourages atheists to eat people.
Now, before we go, let's take a look at this meme in one more way. The only other way I can think to explain this meme is to conclude that we should judge the group by the minority of its members.
Well, that's just flat wrong. I'd say it's more along the lines of you can judge the doctrine by the behaviors exhibited by the people who follow the doctrine. People who follow the oh-so all-encompassing doctrine of I don't think there is a God don't tend to be the ones who fly planes into buildings or bomb abortion clinics. So maybe there's something in the religious doctrine that makes some of their adherents do horrible things.
We've already established how violence and killing can be consistent with the foundations of Islam, but violence and killing cannot be consistent with the foundations of Christianity.
No, you didn't establish that. You cherry-picked through the scriptures to come to that conclusion. I then cherry-picked through the scriptures to come to the opposite conclusion. And once again, I'd like to point out that the guy who is supposed to have authored the Bible, namely God, is supposed to be an all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-wise being. Yet he couldn't manage to write a book that gave a clear message on violence one way or the other.
However, for argument's sake, we'll go ahead and grant that the violence described in the meme follows from each worldview, just as long as a minority of the members of the worldview committed such acts, alright?
As long as we also add the stipulation that you can find at least one writing within that worldview's sacred text that supports the behavior. But I know you won't like that stipulation because atheism has no sacred texts. I'll even cut out the use of the word sacred and say a writing that all atheists would agree is central to what it means to be an atheist. I think that's fair. All Christians would agree that the Bible is central to Christianity, and all Muslims would agree that the Quran is central to Islam, even if there are disagreements about interpretation. But, you know, again, there are no writings that every single atheist would agree is central to being an atheist, so no sacred texts for us.
I'm feeling charitable today. So if we take this route, we can say because a few Muslims flew planes into buildings, that radical Muslims fly planes into buildings. And because a few Christians have killed abortion doctors, we can say that radical Christians kill abortion doctors. And because some atheists like Jeffrey Dahmer and some Chinese communists ate people because they believe that humans didn't have objective value, then we could also say that radical atheists eat people.
Except, as you yourself said, the reason they ate people was because they didn't think people had objective value. They didn't eat people because they thought there was no God. Also, I might add here that the only thing I could find on communist cannibalism was that it was out of desperation to survive that people would eat other people. For instance, during Mao's Great Leap Forward, there was enough food to feed the people, but because Mao wanted to focus on ramping up steel production, the food was never distributed, and in order to survive, people had to resort to cannibalism. So that doesn't even sound like it fits your criterion of not thinking people had objective value. It is quite possible that someone thinks that people have objective value, but would still be willing to resort to cannibalism in a survival situation. You're really digging to the bottom of the barrel here, aren't you? And also, this fails the stipulation that there needs to be some writing that all atheists would agree is central to atheism. Even if you could find such a book, I highly doubt it would have anything about eating other people in it, for or against. This is the whole point of his quote, that religious texts can be interpreted in ways that cause people to think that they are doing God's will when they kill innocent people. And atheism's complete lack of such texts causes people to actually have to put some thought into their morality and come to conclusions based on logic and reason, rather than commandment from on high. Does this mean that every atheist will do that? No. But when an atheist does something like Dahmer did, they don't have the excuse of "I was doing God's will." And it's not really relevant to my point, but I know I'll get crucified in the comments if I don't mention that Dahmer converted to Christianity while in prison, so according to the Christian worldview, he is now enjoying an eternity of paradise after being punished on Earth for just over 3 years. That's God's justice for ya.
And also, I would assume that some atheists would probably agree that eating people is okay on atheism.
In a few situations, yes. In a starvation situation, I would think that eating someone who is already dead would be morally acceptable. In a non-starvation situation, if the person was okay with their remains being disposed of by ingestion, I would consider that to be morally acceptable. Doesn't mean I want to do it in either of those situations, because that's just gross, but I just can't see a good reason to condemn someone who does.
I'd assume that they may think something along the lines of, if we're nothing but animals and nothing more than animals, and we eat other animals, then why is it too crazy of an idea to eat people, especially if those people are already dead and they won't suffer or feel pain?
Yeah, actually, you're not really that far off, but let's look at this from the Christian worldview, shall we? There is no explicit statement in the Bible saying that cannibalism is wrong. Now, God does inflict cannibalism as a punishment now and then, so the inference is that cannibalism is, at the very least, undesirable, but it is not forbidden. There also really isn't any explicit instruction on how you're supposed to dispose of your dead bodies in the Bible, so it seems like cannibalism is at least a viable option. And let's not forget that ritual cannibalism is rather central to Christianity. I can't speak for all atheists, but I don't pretend to eat the body and drink the blood of anyone that I have a personal relationship with. Can you as a Christian say the same? And the majority of Christians believe in transubstantiation, as in the wafers and wine literally become the body and blood of Christ. So it seems that most moderate Christians literally eat people, or at least believe that they do. And you found one guy once who, after becoming a Christian, said that his atheism is why he ate people. Well done.
In nature, several other animals eat their own kind. What makes us think that we're any better than any other animals and that we should be an exception?
The only time I have ever heard atheists bringing up what other animals do as justification for anything is when Christians try to tell homosexuals that homosexuality is unnatural, so we simply point out that it happens all the time in nature, which kind of makes it natural by definition. We don't look to the other animals to learn how to behave.
Well, the very popular atheist and biologist Richard Dawkins may agree with me. He recently wrote, "What if human meat is grown? Could we overcome our taboo against cannibalism?" An interesting test case for consequentialist morality versus yuck reaction absolutism. Is it possible that the most famous atheist of our time, Richard Dawkins, agrees that cannibalism is just a social taboo?
Are you saying that it's not just a social taboo? Can you give me a good reason why eating human flesh is actually morally wrong? Now, I'm not talking about homicidal cannibalism here. Let's go with what Dawkins wrote there. Human flesh grown in a petri dish. No soul, no brain, no thinking, no feeling, just a culture of human flesh. Why would eating this be morally wrong? Sure, the idea of it grosses me out, but I can't really put my finger on why, and being gross does not make something morally wrong. After all, I consider pineapple on pizza to be gross, but that doesn't mean I am morally judging people who put pineapple on pizza. But hey, let's go back to the biblical worldview. There is no proclamation in the Bible that says cannibalism is wrong, and children are essentially property, so taking this from the biblical worldview, the atheist practice of eating babies is morally acceptable. My favorite cooking method is to burn them at the stake.
Look in your hearts and ask yourselves, what do you really want?
To burn children.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I'm still not sure why he assigned the letter L to this one. I mean, he said he would explain that, but he never did. Maybe it was something super obvious that went over my head. That often happens in these situations. If so, I'm sure I'll find out soon enough in the comments. And while he did successfully demonstrate that some atheists, such as myself and Dawkins, aren't necessarily opposed to some very specific and limited forms of cannibalism, he did not demonstrate that this point of view actually stems from atheism. I actually remember hypothetical scenarios that we discussed in some of my high school classes involving cannibalism, and I had pretty much the same views that I do now, despite being a creationist at the time. It's almost as if the morality of cannibalism is unrelated to religion, unless your religion actually explicitly makes a statement on its morality, which Christianity does not. So remember to follow me on Twitter and support me on Patreon. See you next time!